Story 1. Some moments in life feel like walking into a room where the lights flicker, not fully dark, not fully bright, just that strange in-between where anything could be hiding. That's how parenthood sometimes feels to me, especially when I'm tired and running on autopilot. You start noticing things you normally ignore, and the quiet corners of the house start to feel more alive than they should. That was the kind of day I had when something happened that still makes me uneasy whenever I open my hallway closet. My daughter was a toddler at the time, just learning how to form clear sentences, though she spent most of her day babbling happily at anyone who would listen. I was alone with her that afternoon while my partner was at work, and I remember the house being unusually still. It was one of those cloudy days where the light coming through the windows looked dim even though it was daytime, giving everything a kind of washed-out look. Nothing strange happened at first, just the usual chores, snacks, cartoons, and piles of laundry I kept forgetting to fold. Later in the day, I brought her into our bedroom to change her clothes. I always used the changing mat by the closet because it was closer to the dresser and made things easier. The closet door was open, like it normally was, and I didn't think twice about it. She was in a good mood, kicking her feet and laughing in that way toddlers do when they're full of energy for no real reason. I was mostly focused on getting her into clean clothes as fast as possible, but then she stopped laughing at me and started laughing past me. She was looking over my shoulder with this weird kind of fascination, not scared, not confused, more like someone watching a silent puppet show. At first I figured she saw her own shadow, or maybe the sleeves of a hanging jacket moved, catching her attention. Kids latch on to the smallest things, but the longer I watched her, the more it felt like she wasn't just staring at an object. She was tracking something. Her eyes were moving like she was following a person walking slowly. That was the first thing that made me uneasy. I asked what she found funny, half expecting her to say something about a toy, or maybe the stripes on a sweater. Instead, she mentioned something that made my stomach tighten. She talked about a man, just that. A man, nothing more at first. She said it casually, like she was telling me she saw a bird outside. Toddlers don't have a filter, so the seriousness of her tone felt wrong. I asked where she saw him. She pointed directly at the open closet door without hesitation. I turned around right away, more out of instinct than fear. Of course, nothing was there, just clothes, a couple of storage bins, and an old suitcase. The same things that had been sitting there for years. I chalked it up to her imagination. Kids come up with weird phrases all the time, but something about the way she looked into that closet made the hairs on my arms stand up. And then she added something that has stayed in my mind ever since. She described the man as having a strange neck. She compared it to something long and curved, almost like it didn't fit his body. The way she said it made me stop what I was doing. I remember feeling a surge of cold run from my back to my hands. Kids say bizarre things, but there was something too specific in the way she explained it. Like she wasn't guessing or inventing something on the spot, but actually repeating something she believed she saw clearly. At that point, I turned back to the closet again, trying to squash the growing tension in my chest. I tried to convince myself it was shadows. The light from the hallway sometimes cast odd shapes inside the closet, especially with the way the shelves were positioned. I stood up and stepped closer to the doorway, almost expecting something to shift inside. Nothing moved. Nothing looked out of place. The air felt a little stuffy, but that was normal for old closets. Still, the mood in the room felt heavier after that. My daughter wasn't laughing anymore. She stared at the closet like she was waiting for something to happen, like she thought the man she mentioned would return. I picked her up and moved her out of the room. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, but I also didn't want her looking into the closet like she understood something I didn't. For the rest of the day, I couldn't shake the feeling that the hallway felt tighter than usual. Even walking past the closet made me feel like something was sitting just inside the darkness. I kept telling myself it was my imagination reacting to her words. Kids absorb everything and often repeat things wrong. Maybe she saw her own reflection warped in the sliding mirror. Maybe she glimpsed a hanging jacket twisted in a weird way. Maybe she saw nothing at all and just said something random. That night after she went to sleep, I stood in front of the closet again, staring into the dim space. The house was so quiet that I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs. I waited a long time, expecting I don't even know what. A sound, a shift, anything. Nothing happened. Eventually, I closed the closet door and walked away, but my mind hasn't stopped replaying that moment. I never looked into the history of the house. Part of me is curious, but the other part feels like knowing wouldn't help. It might even make things worse. All I know is that after that day, I never changed my daughter near that closet again. And even now, with her older and forgetting the whole thing, I still catch myself avoiding looking into that dark corner when the door happens to be open. I've lived in this house for years, and that closet still feels like it's watching me first. Story 2. Sometimes a house feels like a balloon with too much air in it. Nothing wrong on the outside, but inside the pressure builds in places you can't see. That's how my living room had started to feel in the weeks leading up to the night everything happened. Nothing dramatic, nothing big, just small things that I kept brushing off. A toy left in the middle of the hallway, even when I was sure I'd put it away. A faint sound upstairs when my kid was already asleep beside me. The feeling that the air grew heavier in the far corner of the room late at night, like that part of the house never warmed up with the rest. I chalked it up to parenting exhaustion. When you're raising a toddler alone, you get used to weird little moments and move on. That evening had been normal enough. My daughter had been clingier than usual, but nothing alarming. She was tired, rubbing her eyes, the usual bedtime signs. She drifted off pretty fast, and I let her sleep on the couch beside me while I scrolled mindlessly on my phone. The house was calm, the soft hum of the fridge and the occasional car passing outside. The kind of night where nothing should feel out of place. But around midnight, the air shifted in that small way I had noticed before, like the room exhaled differently. I didn't think too much of it until she woke up with a sudden jerk. At first, I thought she'd had a bad dream. Her face was scrunched up and she looked confused. She wasn't even fully crying yet, just breathing fast like she was trying to catch up with herself. When I asked what happened, she pointed toward the dark corner of the living room, the same corner that always felt colder than the rest. She didn't even look at me, just stared at it with that locked-in expression only little kids can make. I asked again, slower this time, and she kept pointing, her lip trembling. She said it was a bad man. She didn't describe anything else, didn't give details, just said there was a bad man over there. Now, any parent knows that kids come up with random stuff all the time. Imaginary friends, imaginary monsters, imaginary everything. But there was something about the way she pointed at that shadowed corner that made every hair on my arm stand up. She wasn't looking around the room. She wasn't looking under furniture or at a toy or at her own imagination. She was looking at one exact spot, like something was right there. And because she was scared, I turned toward the corner too. That's when it started. The lamp sitting on the bookshelf right next to that corner fell straight off. It didn't just slide or tip. It felt like someone had flicked it off the shelf. The sound of it hitting the floor was so loud in the quiet room that it made both of us jump. I rushed to pick her up because the feeling that washed over me wasn't normal fear. It was that deep, instinctive kind. The kind that makes you want to grab your kid and run without thinking. But I forced myself to breathe and look around. I kept telling myself there were explanations for everything. Maybe the bookshelf wasn't stable. Maybe vibrations from the road shook something loose. Maybe my daughter's sudden movement startled me, and I imagined the lamp falling harder than it actually did. I kept repeating those possibilities as I checked the shelf. Nothing else was out of place. The lamp cord wasn't tangled or being pulled by anything. There was no draft, no open window, nothing that would have nudged it. When I lifted the lamp, it was warm like it had been on for hours, but the space beside it on the shelf felt colder. I carried her to our bedroom, and even though she was calming down, she still kept glancing toward the hallway like she expected someone to follow. I laid her down beside me, and she clung to my shirt with both hands. Every few minutes, she stirred and looked toward the door, squeezing tighter like she could sense something I couldn't. The house had gone unusually quiet. Not peaceful quiet, more like a muffled quiet, as if the walls were absorbing sound. I lay awake for hours listening for anything. Footsteps, breathing, settling wood. Nothing came, but the silence itself felt wrong. By morning, everything looked normal again. The corner that had terrified her looked plain and empty. The bookshelf stood steady. The lamp worked fine. The house felt ordinary in the daylight, almost embarrassingly so. I kept running through the whole night in my head, trying to find the rational explanation I was sure had to be there. Maybe she'd had a nightmare. Maybe the lamp had been unbalanced all along. Maybe the cold corner was just poor insulation. Parenting makes you jump at shadows, especially when you're doing it alone. But here's the thing I still can't shake, even weeks later. She had pointed before anything happened. She reacted to something before the lamp moved. She described a man, not a monster or some random creature. And the fear on her face was the kind you don't teach kids. They either feel it or they don't. I still don't know what she saw. I don't know if it was her imagination, some trick of shadows or something that didn't want to be seen. I just know she slept in my bed that night without me even thinking twice. And since then, I've avoided looking into that corner longer than a second. Because even though I tell myself it was nothing, a small part of me can't help remembering how she stared straight into the dark like someone was there. Story 3. Raising a kid sometimes feels like watching a small echo of yourself walk around. Like seeing pieces of your own thoughts reflected back through another person's tiny, changing face. Most days it's harmless, funny stuff that you shrug off, but every once in a while something slips through that doesn't feel like a normal childhood moment. Something that sticks in your mind longer than it should. That's what happened with my son last week, and I still can't shake the weight of it. For context, my kid is 5, curious, energetic, and at that stage where he mixes imagination with reality so often that it's hard to tell where one ends and the other starts. I've always brushed off the weird things he says. When he talks about imaginary friends or shadows that wave at him, I treat it like normal growing up stuff. Kids say unsettling things without meaning anything by it. That's what I've always told myself. But lately, he'd been acting strange in ways I couldn't fully ignore. It began with small things around the house. I'd find him staring at the hallway mirror late at night when he should have been asleep. He'd stand there on his tiptoes, leaning in close, quietly studying his reflection like it was someone else. Another time I caught him sitting upright in his bed in the middle of the night, not crying or scared, just awake, eyes wide open in the dark, almost like he'd been waiting for something. I tried talking to him about it the next morning, but he brushed me off in that playful way kids do, saying he didn't remember. That should have been comforting, but it only made me uneasy. A couple of days later, I noticed he was avoiding bright rooms, choosing instead to play in the corners of the house where the light didn't fully reach. I'd ask why he was sitting there, and he'd just shrug or say he liked it better. Nothing dramatic, but little things that started making an uneasy picture. Even his preschool teacher mentioned he'd been quieter than usual, spending more time by himself, staring off at nothing like he was thinking too hard for his age. I chalked it up to a phase. Kids go through them all the time. Everything came to a head one afternoon while we were home together. It was an ordinary day. Nothing strange. Nothing that hinted at what he was about to say. I was helping him with a drawing he'd been working on. He'd been making these odd pictures for about a week, just outlines of faces, all with big circles for eyes, no details inside them. I figured he was going through an artistic phase, but that day while he was coloring, he looked up out of nowhere and asked something that stopped me cold. He wanted to know what I see through the black circles in his eyes when I'm controlling him while he's at school. It took a second to register what he'd said. It was so casual, so matter-of-fact, like he was asking what was for dinner. He didn't seem scared or disturbed by the idea, just curious, as if this was something he believed was normal. I tried to get him to explain what he meant, but he only repeated the idea in his own simple way, as if I already knew what he was talking about. When I pushed further, he got quiet, almost confused, like he couldn't understand why I was acting strange about it. The rest of the day, he acted completely normal, but I wasn't. The phrase ran through my mind again and again. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he'd overheard something at school. Maybe it came from a cartoon or some game the kids were playing. Maybe the drawings were just drawings. Maybe the mirror thing, the staring, the late night moments. Maybe all of that was just normal kid behavior that I'd blown out of proportion. But even when I ran through all the logical explanations, I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was going on. That night after he went to bed, I checked on him more than usual. Every time I peeked in, he was asleep, breathing slow and steady. But at around 3 a.m., I woke up to a soft thump coming from his room. When I went to check, he was sitting up again, facing the window this time. His eyes were wide open, and even though the room was dark, the faint streetlight outside reflected off them in a way that made them look too empty. When I asked what he was doing, he didn't respond. Not scared, not upset, just silent, as if he hadn't heard me. When I touched his shoulder, he blinked quickly and asked why I was waking him up, saying he'd been sleeping the whole time. I didn't sleep after that. The next morning he was cheerful and chatty, like nothing strange had ever happened. He didn't mention anything about the drawings, or the mirror, or the controlling comment. When I brought up the question he'd asked the day before, he looked confused, almost embarrassed, and said he didn't remember saying anything like that. I want to believe this was just one of those weird childhood moments parents joke about online. Kids say creepy things all the time. Kids sleepwalk, kids stare, kids make up strange stories. That's the simple explanation, and maybe it's the right one. But the way he said it, the way he stared at that mirror, the way he sits in the dark like he's waiting for something, I don't know. It felt different. It felt like he wasn't making it up. I still see those drawings on the fridge, those blank, dark circles where the eyes should be. Every time I walk past them, I get this strange feeling that I'm missing something obvious, something right in front of me. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe kids just have strange phases. Or maybe, just maybe, he wasn't talking about imagination at all. Story 4. Some homes feel warm the moment you walk in, like a jacket fresh out of the dryer. Others feel neutral, just walls and furniture. But this place, the one I moved into a few months ago, always felt like stepping into a room where someone had just left, even when I knew I was the only one there. It wasn't anything dramatic at first, just that strange stillness you can't explain, but you try to ignore. I figured it was because the apartment was older, the kind where every window angle and hallway corner gives off its own mood. I treated it like background noise until things started happening that I couldn't brush off so easily. The first strange sign came from my daughter. She started mentioning a shadow she kept seeing at night. Not a person, not a shape she could describe, just a moving dark figure that would appear in her room or by the hallway entrance. I tried to reassure her the best way I could. Kids see things when they're tired, especially in new homes. Shadows stretch weirdly at night. Your brain fills in the rest. That's what I told myself too. I didn't want to feed into it or make her more afraid. I chalked everything up to the stress of moving, new surroundings, nerves, imagination, all the usual explanations. Then came the night I saw something myself. I was sitting on the back patio, scrolling through my phone while trying to cool off from the heat inside. The living room lights were still on because my daughter had been drawing on the floor earlier. When I glanced through the glass door, something moved across the room, sliding from the far wall toward the short hallway that led to her bedroom. It wasn't a flicker from a car driving by or a shadow from outside. It looked like someone walking, but without the shape of a person, just a dim form passing through the space like fog in motion. For a second, I told myself it was the TV screen reflecting something, but the TV was off. Then I tried to blame the ceiling light, but it wasn't flickering. It felt like the air shifted in the house at the exact moment that shape moved. I stood up so fast I almost tripped over the chair. My heart was racing in that stupid, embarrassing way it does when your brain knows you saw something, but you try to deny it anyway. I rushed inside and didn't hear anything. No footsteps, no movement. But the house felt off. The hallway felt colder than the living room. I checked the bedroom, half expecting to see someone inside, even though I knew that made no sense. My daughter was asleep, curled up under her blanket. Nothing looked disturbed. Nothing looked wrong. But the feeling didn't go away. It followed me the rest of the night. From that point on, little things started adding up in ways that were hard to ignore. The chandelier in the dining area began to sway every now and then, gently at first, then harder on random nights. There was no draft in the house, no air vent pointed at it. It would move for a minute or two, then stop suddenly like something had let go of it. A few times I took videos, telling myself I'd analyze them later, but every clip looked the same, just a light fixture rocking for no clear reason. The shower curtains started rustling during the night, not the soft kind of movement from a breeze, but the sound it makes when someone brushes their hand along it or slides it slightly. I'd freeze in bed and stare across the hall toward the bathroom door, hoping I'd see something normal, like the AC kicking on. But the AC wasn't the cause. Some nights I convinced myself it was just the curtain settling. Other nights it sounded too deliberate, like someone testing the fabric. The weirdest moment came while we were having dinner. I was at the table with my daughter, helping her with her food, when suddenly the silverware drawer clattered. Not just a little vibration, everything inside shifted loudly as if someone shook the whole drawer. I went still for a moment, listening to see if there was another noise following it. My daughter looked up at me, confused, but she hadn't heard it the way I did. When I checked the drawer, nothing looked out of place, even though I had clearly heard the utensils scrape against each other. After that, I couldn't pretend things were normal. It was always when I was alone. Early mornings, late nights, quiet moments. I'd feel someone pass behind me while I washed dishes, even though nobody was near. Sometimes I'd turn the corner into the hallway and feel that same cold shift in the air that I'd felt the night I saw the shadow. A few times I thought I saw something move in my peripheral vision. I tried to dismiss it as tricks of the light or my eyes adjusting too fast. But deep down, I knew it was the same dark form I'd seen before. I still don't know what to make of it. Part of me thinks there has to be some logical explanation. Old wiring affecting lights, uneven floorboards shifting, the house settling. But the shadow, that's the part I can't reason away. I wasn't half asleep. I wasn't stressed. I was fully awake, looking right at it. I haven't told my daughter that I saw anything. I don't want her to be afraid of her own home. But even now, every time I walk past that hallway, I feel like something is watching from the far end, waiting for the right moment to move again. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe I really am just sleep deprived. But I know what I saw that night, and I know how the house feels when it happens again. Whatever it is, I'm the only one who keeps noticing it, and that makes it worse. Story 5. Sometimes the air in a place feels wrong, like walking into a room where someone just whispered your name and you missed it by a second. That's the kind of feeling I had that night in our old family cabin. I've never been the type to panic easily, but the uneasiness hit me fast, almost like the room had tilted in a way my body didn't agree with. The cabin was familiar. We'd been going there for years, but it felt strange that evening, as if the walls were holding in something that didn't want me there. I had been lying on the old mattress in the small room at the back. It was always the coldest room, but that night the cold felt sharper, like it was creeping up my legs. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was overtired from the long day. But the uneasiness kept pulling at me. It wasn't just nerves, it felt like someone was watching from the doorway, even though I checked it twice. I shut my eyes for a minute, but something made me open them again, and without really deciding to, I looked toward the window beside the bed. That was when things got weird. Outside the cabin, the trees stood in a line like usual, but for some reason, they looked marked. It wasn't real paint, just these strange stripes of color that seemed to glow faintly. Reds, yellows, greens. They ran high up the trunks, almost like someone had dragged a brush across them earlier and forgot to clean it up. I blinked and even rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe it was moonlight bouncing weirdly off the bark or the reflection of something inside the room. But the colors stayed. I remember feeling my stomach twist because I knew it shouldn't look like that. The forest was pitch dark except for a sliver of moon, and nothing explains glowing stripes like the ones I thought I saw. The longer I stared, the worse the feeling got. The cold in the room seemed to spread, and the air felt heavy, almost like someone holding their breath. I told myself it was imagination mixed with the dark and the old creaking cabin noises, but the discomfort wouldn't go away. Eventually, I grabbed my blanket and moved to my brother's room down the hall. He wasn't there. It was just me. That part is important because whatever happened that night happened to me alone. I didn't want to wake anyone, but the thought of staying in that back room made my chest tighten. I settled on his bed and tried to relax. The cabin made its usual settling sounds, pops, tiny groans, little taps from outside, but every noise felt too loud. I couldn't stop replaying what I thought I saw in the trees. I kept telling myself it was just darkness messing with my vision. Maybe the moonlight hit some wet bark. Maybe my eyes were tired. All the usual explanations. But none of them felt right, and the uneasy feeling still clung to me. The kind that makes you check the corners of a room even when you know you'll find nothing there. As the night went on, the feeling changed. Instead of the sense of being watched, it felt more like being nudged, like something telling me to stay where I was. The air in the hallway seemed heavier than the air in my brother's room, and every time I thought about going back, I felt this strange pull in my chest that basically said it wasn't a good idea. It wasn't dramatic or loud, just a quiet discomfort that sat right under my ribs. At some point, I finally drifted off. It wasn't deep sleep, more the kind where you're half awake and every little noise jerks you back. I remember hearing something outside, a groan or shift that didn't sound like an animal, but I was too tired to get up. The night went on like that, with that strange pressure in the air and the memory of those colored lines outside chewing at my brain. Then sometime early in the morning, before anyone else woke up, I heard a crack, a loud, sharp one that jolted me upright. It sounded like a giant piece of wood snapping in half. A second later, the entire cabin shook hard enough that dust fell from the rafters. I sat there frozen, listening to the shudder roll through the structure. When everything finally went quiet again, I stepped into the hallway and saw pieces of bark and leaves near the back door. That's when I realized what had happened. A tree had crashed down right into the side of the cabin, right into the room where I had been lying an hour or two earlier. The roof was dented, the mattress covered in debris. If I'd stayed, even just out of stubbornness, it would have been bad. The weird part was that it wasn't windy at all that night, not even a light breeze. The tree was old, sure, and the hill behind the cabin had softened from rain, but the timing still felt strange. I didn't talk about the glowing stripes for a long time. It sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud. It could have been a trick of the light, or tired eyes, or just nerves playing games. And maybe the uneasiness was just me being jumpy in an old cabin. But even now, part of me wonders if whatever I felt, or whatever I thought I saw, was pushing me to move. Like something was trying to get me out of that room before the tree fell. I still think about it sometimes, especially when I'm in the woods at night. I don't claim it was anything paranormal. There are probably simple explanations for all of it. But the timing, the feeling, the strange vision, everything lined up too cleanly to ignore. Maybe it was just luck, or maybe something was trying to warn me. Either way, I listened, and I'm glad I did. Story 6. Raising kids sometimes feels like watching tiny storm clouds drift across an otherwise clear sky. Most days are normal, even boring, but then something rolls in quietly and makes you question every assumption you've ever had about what kids can or can't see. That's exactly how it felt when my oldest child started talking about the strange things they saw in their bedroom at night. At first, I brushed it off as imagination. Kids dream with their eyes open sometimes, and I thought that was all it was. But as the years went on, the stories became more detailed, more consistent, and honestly more concerning. I didn't let my fears show, but some of those nights stuck with me far longer than I'd like to admit. It started with what my child described as a little girl. They said she visited often, usually in the middle of the night. According to them, the girl wore a long white nightgown that dragged softly across the floor. My child assumed it was their younger sibling wandering in, but that assumption didn't hold up when I heard the details. Their sibling didn't own anything remotely similar to the gown described, and the girl never spoke, never came close. She only moved slowly around the room, stopping most nights to stare at the hamster cage near the dresser. I'm not someone who jumps to conclusions, so I told myself it was probably dreams blending with reality. Kids that age wake up half aware, and sometimes images hang around their minds like leftover shadows. For a long time, that was my explanation. My child wasn't scared, so I didn't feel alarmed. But as they got older, the sightings changed. The girl faded away, and the attention shifted to the closet in the corner of the room. That closet always felt oddly placed, tucked deeper than it needed to be, as if part of it had been added on after the fact. My child never liked it, but didn't have a reason for the discomfort at first. They simply said it felt too dark inside, even during the day. The kids' rooms in that house each had their quirks, so I chalked it up to normal childhood fears. But then my child started mentioning seeing shapes in that closet at night. Not clear figures, just shifting shadows, like someone moving inside. Every time I checked, the closet was empty and normal. I kept the door tightly shut, thinking that would help. It didn't. My child said the door would feel different at night. The air leaking through the cracks felt colder than the rest of the room. Kids exaggerate temperature differences sometimes, so again, I tried not to worry. One night, though, everything escalated. It was late, well past the time children usually wake up for water or a nightmare. I remember hearing fast footsteps rushing down the hall, followed by panic knocking on my bedroom door. When I opened it, my child was standing there trembling so hard they could barely get words out. It took a while before they could explain what happened. I brought them back to my room first, sat them down, and tried to calm them enough to speak clearly. And then they told me. They had woken up and seen someone standing in the closet. Not the girl this time, something much taller, with a shape that didn't match a person exactly. They said the figure seemed bent forward over something on the closet floor, something round like a bowl. They said they saw shadows flickering around the closet walls like something was moving inside with its own light source. Every description made my stomach tighten, but I let them continue without interrupting. What frightened them the most wasn't the figure. It was the movement of their clothes. They said their shirts started sliding off their hangers one by one. Each shirt floated out of the closet and drifted across the top of the wall, gliding slowly, like something invisible pulled them along. According to my child, the shirts moved above their bed, traced along the wall, and then vanished near the corner. They even reached up to touch one, convinced they could grab it, but it slipped through their hands like smoke. By the time they got out of bed to run to me, the last shirt was already disappearing. The entire time they spoke, their voice shook. They weren't the type of kid to exaggerate or lie, especially not when scared. I took them back to their room and checked everything. The closet was exactly as it should be. Every shirt was hanging where it belonged, undisturbed. There were no cold spots, no strange shadows, nothing out of place. I told them gently that it might have been a nightmare, but inside I felt uneasy. Kids don't describe things that vividly unless something felt real to them. That was the only night the events reached that level. After that, my child refused to sleep alone for weeks. Eventually, things stopped happening entirely. We moved houses a few years later, and nothing followed us. As a parent, I still lean toward the logical explanation. Kids dream deeply, and dark rooms can warp the mind. But every now and then, I think about the way my child looked that night, terrified, wide-eyed, absolutely convinced of what they saw. And I wonder if maybe that old house held something none of us fully understood. Whatever it was, it stayed behind, and that's more comforting than the alternative. Story 7. Sometimes parenting feels like walking around with an invisible antenna sticking out of your head, picking up signals you don't understand. Some days those signals are innocent stuff. Your kid babbling nonsense, pointing at shadows, laughing at corners for no reason. But then there are nights where the signal feels wrong, almost like something else is tapping into it. That was the kind of night this happened, and even now, years later, I can still feel the same uneasy knot in my stomach when I think about it. Back when my son was 3, I'd been going through a rough sleep phase. Nothing dramatic, just the usual exhaustion that comes with raising a toddler. He'd been waking up at random hours, sometimes asking for water, sometimes just wandering into my room to climb into bed. So when I finally slept soundly one night, I expected it to be the usual blur. Instead, I fell into one of the strangest dreams I've ever had. In the dream, I was lying in bed, exactly where I really was, watching something in the dark. There was a figure beside my son's bed, tall and thin, with a strange brightness around its head like someone shining a light through fog. It wasn't doing anything violent or dramatic, but it was holding my son's hand and leading him toward the window. I couldn't move, even though I kept trying to shout at it. The feeling wasn't like a nightmare with monsters. It felt more like watching something you're not supposed to see. Then when I finally forced out a scream, I jolted awake so violently I sat up instantly. At first I thought I was still dreaming, because the room was pitch dark and my heart was racing. It took me a second to register where I was and what had happened. I kept telling myself it was just exhaustion, that dreams could mash up anything you saw during the day. But then I heard a soft shuffling sound near the end of the bed. When my eyes adjusted, I saw my son standing by the nightstand, turning on the little lamp we kept there. My brain was still foggy from the dream, so for a moment I didn't say anything. He just stood there, calm as anything, staring toward the window like he was checking if someone was there. I tried to ask him what he was doing up, but my voice barely came out. He looked at me and said something in the most casual way, something he'd never said before, something that froze me completely. He said it was fine now because the strange visitor had left. I don't think I moved for a whole minute. The mix of waking from that dream and then hearing him say something connected to it felt unreal. I kept trying to think of how a kid could link the two things by coincidence. Kids say weird stuff all the time. They copy things they hear on TV or from cartoons. They make up stories. I kept thinking maybe he'd seen something earlier that scared him. Or maybe he just wanted the nightlight on because he woke up confused. But the way he stared at the window didn't feel random. It felt like he expected something to still be there. I tried to settle him back into my bed, hoping he'd fall asleep quickly so I could shake off the creepiness. But the room didn't feel right anymore. It felt heavy, like the air was thicker than normal. Every sound made me jump. The house was old, so the usual creaks and pops were normal at night. But this time, each one sounded sharper. Several times I could have sworn I heard something faint outside the window, like a soft tapping or something brushing against it. I kept telling myself it was the wind, even though the night had been calm earlier. My son fell asleep fast, almost too fast considering he'd been standing in the dark a minute before. I kept looking at the window and then at him, trying to decide if I should wake him and ask more questions or if that would make everything worse. I didn't want to feed into a child's imagination, but a part of me felt like he hadn't imagined anything. Every time I thought about the dream, I got that same tight feeling in my chest like something had followed me out of it. The rest of the night dragged on. I didn't sleep again, not even for a second. Every time I started to relax, I'd get a sudden image of that figure from the dream leading my son away. The strange thing is, I couldn't remember its exact shape once I was fully awake. I just remembered the tall outline, the brightness around its head, and the feeling that it didn't belong in the room. I kept checking on my son, making sure he was breathing normally, making sure he hadn't shifted toward the window. I even got up once to pull the curtains tighter so I wouldn't see anything outside if I accidentally looked over. When morning finally came, everything looked normal again. The room felt lighter. The weird heaviness was gone. My son woke up cheerful and didn't say anything else about the visitor. I tried asking him gently if he remembered waking up, but he just shrugged like he had no idea what I was talking about. Kids forget things fast, so maybe it was nothing. But the part that still sticks with me is how what he said matched my dream so perfectly. Even though I'd never told him anything like that. I still don't know if it was just a freak coincidence or if something else happened in the house that night. I've had plenty of dreams since then, but none have ever left me with that same cold feeling. And whenever I think back to that night, I still get the sense that maybe my son wasn't the only one who woke up to something in the room. Story 8. Sometimes kids are like blank notebooks. Anything can get written into them, even things you don't want to believe are real. That's how I felt when my son started talking to someone I couldn't see. At first, I brushed it off as imagination. He was 4, the age when shadows become monsters and stuffed animals have full personalities. But this was different, too detailed, too steady, and too strange for someone who barely understood the world. It started quietly. I'd hear him in his room mumbling like he was having a full conversation. When I'd step in, he'd stop mid-sentence and stare at the wall like he suddenly forgot how to talk. He told me the name of whoever he was talking to, but the name didn't sound made up. He described this person as a dark-skinned man who wore almost nothing and liked wandering the woods behind the house. My son didn't know anything about tribes, cultures, or even the history of the land we lived on. So when he explained that this man used to live nearby a long time ago, I felt an uncomfortable pinch in my stomach. Kids say strange things, sure, but he mentioned things that felt too specific to come out of nowhere. He'd say that this man hunted animals around the property and that something terrible happened to him and the rest of his village. I never asked for details because the little he shared was already unsettling enough coming from a 4-year-old. Sometimes I'd be getting ready for bed and hear him whispering quietly, almost too quiet to understand. When I'd get close to check if he was talking in his sleep, he'd snap his head toward me like he'd been caught doing something wrong. No smile, no explanation, just a stiff silence. What made everything worse was his sleepwalking. He'd been doing it since he was small, but it got much more frequent after this friend showed up. I'd find him standing in hallways, hands loose at his sides, completely unaware. A few times he'd wander right next to my bed without making a sound. I'd wake up to the feeling of being watched and see him inches from my face. He wouldn't speak when I tried asking what he was doing. He'd just blink slowly, then shuffle back to his room like something had pulled a string attached to his spine. One afternoon, he told me something that tightened every muscle in my body. He mentioned that his imaginary friend didn't like someone being mean to him. The strange part was that he said this before that person even arrived at the house. I didn't take it seriously at the time, but the statement stuck with me like a splinter. I tried to laugh it off, but couldn't shake the uneasy feeling it left. That night, long after everyone had gone to sleep, something happened that still makes my skin crawl. I woke up to the loudest scream I've ever heard from inside a house. It wasn't a scared shout. It was the kind of scream that hits a pitch you don't forget. I bolted upright and ran down the hall, thinking something awful had happened. When I reached the room, I found my son trembling and pointing at his bed. He insisted that someone had shaken it hard enough to make him bounce. It was a bunk bed, the top bunk, and he swore it moved like someone grabbed the frame and rattled it with force. I checked underneath, behind it, everywhere. Nothing. My younger son was fast asleep in the next room during all of this. He didn't wake up once. After that night, things spiraled in ways I still can't fully explain. My older son became more anxious. He stayed close to me, kept glancing at doorways like he expected someone to walk through them. Meanwhile, my younger son stopped mentioning the imaginary friend completely, almost like the whole thing had been erased from his mind. The house didn't feel right anymore. Even during the day, the air felt heavy, and every small sound seemed louder than it should be. A month later, another moment burned itself into my memory. It was winter, early morning, still dark. I woke up because I heard the front door open and shut. It wasn't slammed, but closed carefully, like someone trying not to make noise. I ran downstairs thinking someone had broken in. When I opened the door, a blast of cold air hit me so hard my eyes watered. I stepped outside and saw my younger son all the way across the snowy yard, wearing nothing but underwear, standing perfectly still. The snow was up to his ankles. He didn't shiver. He didn't look confused. He was staring right at me with this blank expression that made my chest tighten. Then he raised his arm and slowly waved like he wasn't even fully awake. Getting him back inside was one of the most disturbing moments of my life. He had no memory of walking out, no memory of waking up, no explanation for why he waved. Nothing. People tell me kids just have active imaginations, that sleepwalking can lead to strange behavior, that maybe the scream came from a nightmare, and the bed shaking was him thrashing in his sleep. Maybe the friend he described came from something he saw on TV or in a picture book he forgot he saw. I've tried to convince myself of every reasonable explanation, and maybe they're right. Maybe it was all just weird timing mixed with childhood imagination and sleepwalking. But I'll say this, nothing shakes a parent quite like watching their kid wave at you from across a snowy yard at 4 a.m, acting like someone else guided them there. Story 9. Sometimes raising a kid feels like carrying a small lantern through a huge dark field. You see just enough to keep moving, but every now and then, the light catches something you aren't ready for. That's how it felt the night this happened. I wasn't even thinking about anything strange at the time. I was half asleep, half dreaming, the way parents get when they've spent the evening cleaning up toys, checking homework, and trying to squeeze in a bit of rest before the next day starts. My daughter was 11 then, old enough to be independent, but still young enough that her imagination ran wild sometimes. She'd always had a habit of talking in her sleep, but nothing too concerning, at least not until that one morning. It started with a heavy thud that ripped me out of sleep. At first, I thought something had fallen in the kitchen. Maybe a pan slid off the counter or the fridge door slammed shut. But then the thud came again, louder, faster, like someone throwing their whole weight into a door. I sat up, confused, trying to figure out if it was real or if I dreamed it. When the banging repeated a third time, harder than before, everything in me went alert. It didn't sound like the creaks and groans of an old house. It sounded intentional, like someone was trying to break in or get out. I rushed downstairs, heart pounding, already preparing myself for the possibility of an intruder. But when I turned into the kitchen, I stopped dead. My daughter was standing at the back door, both hands gripping the handle like she was trying to yank it open. She was slamming her shoulder against the door between attempts, almost frantic. Her whole body was tense, like she was fighting panic, and it took me a second to understand what I was looking at. She wasn't fully awake. Her eyes had that strange glassy look sleepwalkers get, where they seem to be staring at something behind you instead of at you. She was mumbling something under her breath, but at first it was too low and shaky for me to make out. Then she said it again, louder, and I caught enough to understand what she was trying to do. She kept insisting that somebody wanted to come inside and that she needed to open the door for him. The way she said it made my stomach twist. Not because of the words themselves, but because she sounded afraid of the idea of him being left outside, like she believed something bad would happen if she didn't let him in. I tried to snap her out of it, but she didn't react. She just kept pulling at the door handle like she was certain someone was standing on the other side waiting. The strange part was how cold the air felt in that moment. Not just the usual early morning chill. This was sharper, like someone had opened a window I couldn't see. It made the hair on my arms rise. I ended up grabbing her shoulders gently and turning her away from the door. She didn't fight me, but she didn't acknowledge me either. It was like she didn't even see me, her focus entirely fixed on something I couldn't perceive. I managed to guide her back upstairs. The whole walk she kept glancing over her shoulder, still whispering about how he needed to come in before it was too late. Her voice stayed low, shaky, and urgent. I kept telling myself it was just a sleepwalking episode, something harmless. But it didn't feel harmless. It felt like she was caught in a dream she couldn't escape from. Once I got her into bed, she went fully limp and fell into a deep sleep almost immediately. I stayed in her room for a while, watching her breathe, still rattled from the whole thing. And the next morning I asked her gently if she remembered anything. She looked confused and shook her head. She didn't even remember getting out of bed. That made me feel uneasy, but I shrugged it off. Kids forget weird dream stuff all the time. What bothered me more was the back door. When I went to check it, I found fresh scratches around the lock, the kind that come from fingernails dragging or scraping. That didn't make sense, because she was pounding on the door with her shoulder, not clawing at it. I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe she had used her hands at some point, but the marks still looked strange. For the next few nights, I barely slept. Every small noise made me sit up straight. A few times I woke thinking I heard someone walking in the hallway, but when I checked, everything was still. My daughter didn't sleepwalk again, but she started asking odd questions before bed. She wondered out loud if someone could get lost outside our house. She asked if shadows ever followed people home. She wasn't scared when she asked, just curious in that innocent kid way, but something about the timing made my skin prickle. I kept telling myself that none of it meant anything. Kids pick up weird ideas from TV or stories at school all the time. Sleepwalking can make people do all kinds of things. The banging could have been her half-dreaming something frightening. Maybe the cold air was just my nerves. Maybe the scratches were older and I hadn't noticed. Story 10. Sometimes houses feel like old puzzles, and every room hides a corner you don't notice until it's too late. When we moved into our new place, I never thought I'd discover a corner that could make me question what I thought was normal. My daughter's room was at the end of a narrow hallway, the kind of layout that always seems smaller in person than it looks on paper. There was a closet tucked away on one side, almost like the room had secret compartments waiting to be discovered. I didn't think much of it at first, just a typical kid's closet, but that morning it became the center of my attention in the worst way. I'd only lived in the house for about a week, still unpacking boxes and figuring out the creaks and quirks of the place. That morning I woke up early, stretching and yawning, expecting the usual sight of my daughter curled up in her bed. But the bed was empty. At first I thought she had wandered downstairs for breakfast. I checked the living room and kitchen. Nothing. My stomach tightened. I looked back at her bedroom door and called out softly, asking if she was there. No response. Then it started. A voice shouted loud and sharp from the closet at the end of the hallway. It wasn't the calm, sleepy voice of my daughter. It was strained and harsh. I froze in place for a moment, trying to convince myself I had misheard. But then it shouted again, more insistently, telling me not to come in. The way the sound bounced off the narrow walls made it impossible to pinpoint where exactly it was coming from. My pulse sped up. I couldn't see anyone through the closet door. It was too far away, and the narrow hallway distorted the shadows. I called out again, my voice shaking slightly, asking what was happening. I heard another shout back, this one sharper, demanding that I stop looking. I told myself it had to be my imagination, but the echo in that tight hallway made my stomach twist. Every creak of the floorboards beneath me felt amplified, and even the quiet hum of the heating system sounded like whispering. My eyes kept flicking toward the closet door, convinced I might see movement behind it, but I didn't see anything. I took a cautious step forward and another shout rang out. This time it seemed to come from a different angle, as if whoever or whatever it was moving just out of sight. I told myself again that my daughter had to be inside, maybe playing some game I didn't understand yet, but the harshness of the voice didn't fit with her usual tone. My heart pounded. The shadows cast by the morning light made the small hallway look longer, and I felt a chill creeping down my spine. After a few tense minutes, I worked up the nerve to edge closer to the closet. I called my daughter again, asking her to come out. The response made my stomach drop. Something insisted it wasn't her, that I shouldn't look. I stepped back, telling myself I needed backup. I went to grab my wife from our bedroom to help check. As I returned, bracing myself for a confrontation, I heard movement inside the closet. A small shuffle, like someone bending over, adjusting something. Finally, I peeked inside carefully, and there she was. My daughter, dressed in a bright strawberry shortcake costume, crouched low to hide from me. She'd been trying to surprise me and didn't want me to see her before she was ready. All that shouting, all the fear I'd been feeling, was her playing a game in her own imagination. I felt relief hit in a wave so strong it left me a little shaky. Even after seeing her, though, my mind lingered on that moment before I knew it was her. The hallway had felt like a tunnel leading nowhere. The closet felt like it had a presence of its own, like it had been holding its breath and watching. Every creak of the floorboards, every strange echo, seemed to stretch time. I knew logically it was just my daughter being mischievous, but part of me couldn't shake the way the room had made me feel. Like I was intruding on something I shouldn't have been. Later, when I told myself the story out loud, I could laugh, but the memory still sends a chill down my back. Sometimes the ordinary corners of a home can play tricks on your mind, especially when you're alone and the space feels older, tighter, and quieter than you remember. And sometimes, even when the explanation is simple, your senses insist on remembering the fear first. I still see that closet differently now, even though I know it's just a piece of wood and shelves. The way it felt that morning, like it had a mind of its own, is something I won't forget. And even though I know there's a rational explanation, every creak in the narrow hallway still makes me glance over my shoulder before stepping forward.